back to Collaboration Conversations. I'm the co host, Regina Partain Bergman. My co host, Pearl Cox, is unable to be with us at this time, and so we have an amazing guest co host today. I'm excited to bring you our guest co host, Daniel Aaron. Daniel is amazing. We've had a few conversations lately. Let me tell you just a teensy bit about him, and then I'll have him tell you more. He is an author, a transformational entertainer. That's an interesting title, isn't it, folks? An entrepreneur, a yogi, an investor, and so much more. And we're going to hear about some of that as we go through our collaboration conversation today. So, welcome, Daniel. So glad to have you here as our guest co host today.
Well, thank you, Regina. It's an honor. I'm excited for the opportunity to get to hang out and speak with you again. And what an exciting topic, collaboration.
Yeah, I love it. It's one of my favorite topics. It, it was just a no-brainer when I thought about, okay, I need to get set up on a LinkedIn Live. They had opened it up for me, said I was good for it. And I thought, what do I need to, collaboration. We got to talk about collaboration. It's just such a fantastic subject. So let's start by having you share a little bit about who you are with our folks, kind of a bit about your journey, who you serve, why it's important to you, that kind of a thing. And then we'll just dive in and talk about collaboration.
Sure, thank you. Well, for me, it started really early in my life when I was just a little kid looking around and seeing that most of the people I saw, and my family was lower middle class, East Coast of the US, people were not really inspired. They weren't thriving. They were just getting by so much. And I just remember as a little kid looking and thinking, this can't be right. There's got to be more. And then kind of forgot about that. In my mid 20s, I was really opposed to religion. I was agnostic. I had no interest in spirituality. Nonetheless, it was like God reached down, slapped me upside the head, and said, look, man, there's more than you've been seeing in the world.
He had other
And
plans for you.
exactly, yeah. And it wasn't even a word I could have used then, God. Uh,
Right.
but it was devastating and awesome. It gave me a taste of what's possible for humans, of bliss, of the divine. I went from not believing to not believing, knowing that there's more than just us. And it also destroyed my whole previous life because I didn't know what to do anymore. I couldn't go back to that. I didn't know how to
Yeah.
live in the ways that I had experienced. So
Right.
when I came out of the depression that followed that, I got obsessed with personal and spiritual development, and that became my whole life. It was how to be human, how to be in the world but not of it. And that just naturally led me to teaching and coaching and sharing. And I lived for many years in Bali and ran transformational events there, and I built a center. And then about 5 years ago, it was time to switch things up again, and I shifted over to kind of the US. I'm here in Hawaii, and
Kind
and I
of
have a
the
really blessed life. I write and I have some coaching programs and help people to thrive in their lives, and I get to talk to people like you.
yeah. Very good. And I am so grateful that we met and get to have these conversations. I've enjoyed every time we've gotten to talk. It's been great. So let's dive in and share some value around collaborations. So what has your base experience with collaborations been? Just kind of walk us through a little bit of how collaborations have impacted you and your life.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that prior to this conversation because when I was a kid and a young man, I was so introverted, so socially awkward, shy that collaborate. Yeah, you too. Okay. So collaborations to me just felt like painful, difficult, awkward. And eventually I got a little bit beyond where I was on the spectrum of social awkwardness. Um, and when I started teaching more and working with people more, and then a real shift came for me when I was living in Bali, and without meaning to, I found myself in a leadership position. I was running these events, and I had a staff, and I had a guest faculty, and then I had students and vendors and employees, and I was like, wow, I better learn something about leadership because that seems to be what I'm doing.
Right.
And I remember so clearly one book I was reading said, leadership is the glass ceiling on your success and your happiness, right? Your
Mm,
leadership ability, glass ceiling on your success. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I could see that. And, and I love the thing, Jim Rohn, one of my favorite mentors, says, happiness is moving toward something that is meaningful to you, progress toward a goal that is meaningful to
yes.
you. Right? So then I thought about it more and I said, well, and then there's that old leadership saying, which is, if you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, you need to go with other people. And so
Right.
as I started putting these pieces together, I realized that, well, if we want to really do something valuable in the world, if we want to move rapidly toward the goals that are important to us, we can't do it alone. It's about collaboration. And leadership really is about understanding ourselves, leading ourselves, and doing it in such a way that we can relate with, support, connect to, and enroll other people in our visions.
Yes. I love that enroll other people in our visions. That's so important. It takes me back to my the days when I had my a staffing firm. So for a little over 12 years, I owned a staffing firm, and it was interesting. Sidebar, total sidebar here.
Yeah.
But when I would bring people on, one of the things that I had them do was read Who Moved My Cheese before their first training session with me. And one of the gals, she's sitting there at the first training session. She's been with us long enough to see a little bit about how that cheese moves, right? And she said, lady, you don't have cheese. You have Velveeta and it's been in the microwave. But it was just, and then at one point, she gave me a little mouse holding a piece of cheese, a little stuffed mouse holding a piece of cheese. Became a great, just a great story in our company. But just thinking about that leadership, because what I was doing was giving them my vision in that training. That's, and that, you can have that vision, but sometimes the course gets kind of like this going to it, doesn't it? It's not
Yeah.
always a straight course.
Very seldom.
Yeah, which is why that leadership is so important, right? To
Yeah.
keep people on that path when the path diverges and changes a bit and all of that, and to keep the vision in front of them, keep them moving towards that vision. And you, as the leader, are able to do that.
Yeah, well, and I would take it even a step further because and to extend that analogy, which is a wonderful one, because part of what leadership involves is coming to a place where there isn't necessarily a path, right?
Yeah.
Because if there was
Amen.
a path, we'd be following,
Yeah,
right? So what a leader
exactly.
does is say, hey, it's up to us to navigate. I can't do it on my own. So how can we
Right.
work together to create
Yes.
something new?
Yes. Absolutely. And is so, it's if you've ever been part of a really good team, it's, a lot of people have had bad team experiences. And I had amazing people in my company. And, uh, you know, uh, I hired good people, but there's an element also of the leadership that impacts that, and the way that you work with your people. And we had just a great, I mean, overall, good people in the company, but I had a great leadership team that we would come together quarterly and just, spend a couple of days together and planning, strategizing, and anyway, it was just really exciting to be in that space.
Yeah,
And I
that's
and
beautiful.
and I and I could say my team felt that way too. There was a lot of energy and synergy in the room.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah.
So going back to collaboration. Sorry, folks. Sidebar on leadership here a bit, but it is part of that collaboration. So Tie that all together for us, Daniel.
Well, what came to mind for me as you were speaking about that, about how inspiring and exciting and how good it feels to be part of a team. Um, this is not a new or radical concept, yet often overlooked, right? I think of Napoleon Hill, right, and his success teachings and authorship around what he called the mastermind principle,
Right.
right? But even that, if you take it further back, right, in part of my history is as a yogi, and from the Hinduism and yoga culture, there's something called a satsang. And satsang is made up of two words, sat meaning truth, and anga is a group or a gathering. So a satsang is a gathering of people in the name of truth,
Oh, I like that.
along the lines of, there's a line where Jesus said, when two or more gather in my name, I will be there. And what
Yes.
it points to in all of these things is there is an exponential power. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's
Right.
when we come together with a common vision, goal, values, then there is this alive energy that allows
Yes.
us to create more.
Yes. And the word exponential comes to mind. Those results, again, not 1 + 1, but an exponent, an exponential um, achievement of that. Again, the other day somebody had said 1 + 1 = 11, that kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, love that. I love that. And yeah, it does. There is an excitement around good collaborations, whether that be a work team, like I'm recalling from my staffing company, or or it's a group of people that come together to do something exciting together. That collaboration it's palpable. That's the word I want. It's palpable. I worked for not worked for, but for a number of years, I assisted in a community um, training program, a leadership program within the community.
Hmm.
And that was one of those things that was so exciting to see people from all areas of the community come into this leadership training and step into their power, step into their place of leadership, and watch those lives change as they did that. And that's exciting, and that's again collaboration, right?
Yeah.
People pooling their resources, their knowledge, their skill sets and their connections, all of that, pooling all of that for the benefit of everybody in that organization, in that training.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's I think triply important these days, the skills of collaboration, right? We're living in a time that is so polar, right? There's so many different factions that are opposing each other in ways. And, you know, well, we could debate, well, this viewpoint is right and this viewpoint is right. What we do know, we can't know about that necessarily, but what we do know is when we're opposing each other, we are creating conflict.
Yes.
And more, it becomes obvious that if we don't figure out how to work together, get along better, well, we're just going to blow each other up. And
Amen.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. We've entered a phase, and I guess these phases have come throughout history, but I think we've entered a phase where instead of that collaboration, um, I had a word there for a second and it kind of escaped me now, but there's no respect for someone who has a different opinion than you have.
yeah,
The respect is gone. We can disagree, but we don't have to be disagreeable about it. We can disagree and still collaborate. We can
yeah,
come from different points of view and still collaborate. Community community groups do that all the time, right? They bring people together that are on different sides of the spectrum and figure out a way to all work together for the same goal. And so again, we can disagree on things, but ultimately finding that path that we can all move forward towards the goal is what it's all about, right?
Yeah, well said. For years, I lived in intentional communities, and so I studied them a lot and really looked at how it is that some flourish and some seem to fizzle out. We'll just put it that way.
Right.
And one of the things I came across is there's a very specific type of community. It was from Japan, and the name may come back to me. It hasn't yet. We'll see. Um, and it's really extraordinary what they created, and they did everything in their community by consensus. And one of the guidelines that I remember picking up from studying them is that, well, when they had community meetings, when there was a decision to make, one, they would sit in a circle together, right? So that constellation of
Yeah.
we are together as opposed to
Right.
sitting across the table from each other,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then one of the things they would do is whenever somebody would say, I think we should do this, or this is what's important, they would bring their opinion, their perspective forward. The visualization they used is they're taking their idea, their concept, and they're putting it in the middle of the circle. And then anybody else, they might completely disagree, yet they were trained to disagree with the idea, with the perspective, rather than with the person.
Yes.
So
I love
focusing
that.
on the center.
Yes. And we've lost that art in general. I mean, yes, there are still some folks who do that, but in general, as a society, we've lost that art.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and what you're doing here with this type of meeting is bringing it back, reminding
Hope
us
so.
of how important it is,
Yeah.
because it's always desire and motivation brings the skills.
Right. And we tend to think offhand today when we talk about collaboration, at least those of us who are in the business world, the entrepreneurial world, we tend to think of that from a business perspective, that collaboration. But it doesn't have to be anything to do with business or a business. It can, it's just people coming together for a cause or something that they want to achieve together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nicely said.
Yeah. It's always interesting to see what path we go down in this show because it's different every single time, and I love it. That's one of the things I love about doing this is it's just
Mm,
so unique each time.
yeah.
So, um, okay. So, what other aspects of collaboration have impacted your life, Daniel? And I know you have your book behind you there.
Mm.
Let's bring that in at this point as well, because I know it deals with some collaborations as well. And so let's talk about your book a bit, and then maybe point out one significant collaboration in your life.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so the title of the book is The Art of Spiritual Leadership: 40 Laws to Transform Your Life and the World. And a little side note about it, which actually does point to a kind of collaboration. When I was working with the designers on the cover of this, I got back the initial designs from the designers, and I looked at it and I was like, I don't like any of these. These are like stock photos with some text. I could have done that. And my daughter, who was 13 at the time, was sitting there with me, and she said, well, what do you want it to be? And I was like, oh, well, that's a good point. I guess I need to be a little more directive about it. So then I
Right?
started thinking about it. I was like, well, it'd be cool. There is this metaphor of a hot air balloon lifting us up. And really what we're talking about is in some way together uplifting the planet that we share. And then she said, oh, I could draw that for you. I said, really? She said, yeah. And so she did. So she
Wow.
she at age 13 drew the
She did the
cover
cover
photo.
design.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. That
Yeah, it
is
was
fantastic.
really fun. Her first paid design job, which I liked, and gave me a cover that I really like.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Does she want to do design work? Is that something she wants to do moving forward, or?
Uh,
What are her interests?
yeah, I'd say it's one of probably about 12. Um,
Okay.
and that's great.
Narrowing, but she's young.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's cool. That is really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
absolutely. My daughter used to help me with um, bookkeeping things, when she was young, bank statements, that kind of a thing, helping out with the stuff like that. And I had forgotten all about that, but she has applied for some accounting. We're getting an echo, Daniel. I'm hearing my voice echo back. Okay, now it stopped. Thank you. Um, I had forgotten all about that, and she's been applying for some bookkeeping positions, and in her resume and all of that, and she talks about that a bit as when she was a child, she's had a love for this forever.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's good to expose them to as many things as we can so that they can find out what they like, find out what intrigues them.
One of the things one of my teachers used to say, all right, we all know the saying that it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
His twist on it was, well, the reason it takes a village to raise a child is because all of us have different neuroses.
Yeah.
So if a child is exposed to a village, then they get to choose which neuroses fit for them,
I love it. I love it.
or maybe leave some of them behind.
Or maybe leave something behind. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what was one of the most significant collaborative ventures that you've had in your career or in your life?
Well, what comes to mind as you say that, something I haven't thought about for a while is when I was in my early 20s, I, in an un, unplanned way, without any desire to live in community, I was shortly out of university and still living in a university town, and it's hard to get housing. And then there was this ad for a lot of square footage for not that expensive in a community house. And I remember
Right?
I was like, well, I guess I'll go look. But I had this image in my mind already that it was going to be like, some little hippie village with a sink full of spaghetti dishes. And I was just like, I don't think it's going to work. But I went there, and it really changed my life, because from the moment I walked in, it was this beautiful home. There were, I think, 8 adults and 4 children living there. And they had worked out a way of living together where they shared different responsibilities and roles. The house was
Right?
beautiful. They shared meals together. They had meetings once a week. And I ended up living there and just seeing a whole different way of being, as compared to, I grew up in a nuclear family. Well, it was just me and my
Right?
mom, but where it's very isolated in some way. And another of my teachers years ago, a spiritual teacher, used to say the most dangerous element in modern human life is isolation, right? Because when we are isolated, then all these things can develop attitudes, behaviors that are
Mm-hmm.
really destructive, but we don't have any
Yes.
feedback or accountability for it. And when we are in out of isolation and in community, not only do we have feedback, hopefully loving feedback, caring feedback,
Right.
we've also got exposure to different ways of being. So along the same lines as village and child, that was so important to me, and at first really uncomfortable. Again, because I started out quite introverted and shy, and yet I really learned from them the power of, hey, it's okay to have conflict. It's natural. It's going to happen. What's really important is how we speak about it, how we respect each other, how we care
Yes.
for it, and then what agreements and resolutions do we find together that is mutually agreeable and beneficial.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. And that there comes in that process, there's that learning to understand where somebody else comes from, right? Because when you can understand where they come from, then you have much more compassion in the relationship. Do you agree with that?
Well, absolutely. And one of the areas of interest for me in life as a coach and a teacher is how do we positively influence people? How do we guide them? And one of the most basic things is whenever we are judging them or criticizing them, we are definitely not influencing them, right?
Right.
Like there's that old saying,
Not
nobody.
positively at any rate.
Exactly. Yeah. We're pushing them away. Nobody
Yeah.
cares what you know until they know how much you
How much
care.
you care.
Right.
Yes.
So when we can understand their worldview, when we can, step into their shoes and see what things are like, well, then of course they're doing what they're doing. Of course they're seeing
Yeah.
things the way they're seeing because that's what they would do from the background they have. And then when we come from that understanding, then we have the possibility to be of benefit to them, of positive
Absolutely.
influence.
I'm going to harken back to my staffing days for a moment. And what we used a really powerful tool in our hiring that was over 90% predictive of success on the job. When we knew what the performance factors were for success, we could tell you if that person had it or not. And it there were 14 different scales that evaluated over 50 performance factors.
Hmm.
And teamwork, team building was something that I focused on a lot. We had a lot of women in our organization, and sometimes drama can accompany a lot of women in the workplace. And I really was proud of the fact that we didn't have a lot of that drama. And part of that was when I hired each person, I sat them down and told them, look, I've hired you because you are blah blah blah, whatever, fill in the blanks for their expertise, for who they are, and shared some things with them. And I said, but what you need to know is that every other person on this staff went through that same process, and they were hired because of the strengths that they bring to the job. And we all need to respect each other's strengths and all that. And they really got along well. Well, my business partner and I had taken everybody out to dinner this one night, and we shared their profiles with them, and we shared their Myers-Briggs, behavioral profile with them because we wanted to enhance their understanding and their collaboration, right? So their understanding of each other, who they were, and who everybody else was, and then that allows for a better work environment and more collaboration. So the next morning, he called me, my business partner called me, and he said, "How'd you like to have breakfast before we go into the office?" I said, "Sure." So we met at the same restaurant we'd had everybody at the night before for this event. We get a phone call in the middle of breakfast saying, "We just had a cat fight at the office." And I said, "Oh, no, you didn't." That does not happen in my company. No. So we finished our breakfast, headed down to the office. And there were two young ladies, both young, very, very young, in their early 20s. And one was the receptionist, and then one did something else. And they had kind of gotten in each other's faces. So I said, "Okay, we're going to the conference room. You may each bring a champion with you. You may bring somebody who knows you so well and can stand up for you when you can't stand up for yourself. Okay? So you each can bring a champion in." We put their profiles up on the whiteboard, and it was clear as daylight where the conflict came from in terms of where they were opposites in their profiles. And I said, "Look, ladies, we're going to resolve this, or one or both of you are going down the road kicking rocks because we're not going to have this happen again." And so I have a picture of them after the meeting with them standing at the counter hugging one another. Now, did it resolve all their issues? No, but it changed their relationship, and it helped everybody else on staff realize too that we're all working together. And so it was such an experience that I'll never forget it. that that once they understood where the conflict came in, it's like, I'm high on this scale, you're low on this scale. I'm low on this scale, you're high on this scale. And those two things were impacting their ability to communicate and causing frustration because they didn't understand why the other person was doing something so opposite to the way that they would do it. got that out of the way, and they were fine. But again, it is that collaboration, right? That working in an environment requires collaborating if you're going to be happy in your work. I mean, you don't have to collaborate, but you don't have to be happy either, right?
Well, and successful in it too, because
And
to the
successful in it.
degree that
Yeah.
we are in conflict, our
Yeah.
our productivity decreases as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. Interesting memories.
That's a great story. And I remember when I was first studying Myers-Briggs, one of the books that I loved from that, the title of it was "Please
Please
Understand Me,"
understand me.
right? And
Yes.
and years later, when I was studying communication and studying a technique that's kind of from the Harville Hendricks Imago therapy style, what they call sometimes reflective agreement communication, one of the
Okay.
main basic premises is if we're having a challenge, if there are emotions involved, when you speak something, my job isn't to agree with you or give you my perspective. My first job is to show you that I understood what you said, right? That I
Exactly.
understand where you're coming from. And
Yes.
it's amazing how often that causes conflict and upset to evaporate, because so much of the time, all we really want is for somebody to understand us.
Yes. Yes. And I can't remember where I learned it, whose book it came from or whatever, but it was that definition of listening and understanding. If you can express it back, what you just heard expressed back in such a way that the person who said it says, "Yeah, that's what I meant,"
Yeah.
then you got it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so often we skip that step.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
jump
We're
right
so,
over it and think, "Oh, well, I know what you meant," and we're totally off base.
yep. Yep. And
And
it's
that
it's a
happens.
it's an amazing thing because we can use this technique without anybody knowing it, and it's so powerful. When I do this sometimes with my daughter who's 15 now, and she's upset about, she says something to me and I say, "Oh, it sounds like you're upset about that, and you wish this is what would have happened." And there's, before I say that, there's this big charge, and then she goes, "Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. You
And the
got it.
shoulders
That's
come
it."
down and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was just gonna say. It's not only in business, it's in our personal lives, in our families, definitely in our families. I mean, if there's any place that we're gonna misunderstand, it's in our families, right? A lot of emotion gets tied up in those relationships.
Yeah.
And yeah, we need to make sure we're understanding one another. So in any of those environments, that level of understanding will enhance your ability to be together, work together, live together, achieve great things together.
Yeah. Well
Yeah,
said. Yeah.
collaboration. Love it. Any last thoughts that you have about collaborations, Daniel? If you had to kind of sum it all up, what would you say?
Well, I have the thing that comes to mind is a friend of mine is a real communications expert. That's what he teaches and coaches, and he speaks about the era that we are in now. And if we've gone through the industrial age, and we've gone through the information age in some way, the digital age, what we are coming into now is probably the relational age, right?
Mm,
The age where what we crave and what we need to really learn about in a whole new way is how to relate. Um,
yeah,
and I think that's evidenced by, as we were referring to earlier, just the polarization that we're seeing, paving the way for that real need.
yeah,
And as I said earlier, that how impressed I was with that quotation, that leadership ability is the glass ceiling on success and happiness. I'd say equally connected to that is our collaborative abilities are the measure of our happiness and success, right? Because we're here on this earth plane and whether it's business, family, friendships, community, to be connected, right? And
Yes.
to play and work with each other and to share positive feeling amongst each
Yes.
other. So that in some ways, there's really nothing more important than that.
Nicely said. Nicely said. Yeah.
Mm.
And you cannot be happy in the midst of conflict. So the more we learn to get along, collaborate, respect one another, even if their point of view is polar opposite to yours, they deserve your respect.
Yeah.
And so if I think you're absolutely right about it's relational, and if we don't get it right, I think we're headed down a really bad road if we continue to be so polarized and every day becoming more polarized.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we're headed down a bad road. So let's all collaborate
Yeah.
and get
Well,
us
thank
back
you for
on
what you're doing
track.
here. What you are doing here with this platform is, reminding all of us of the importance of it and providing motivation, skills, and inspiration toward all of us doing that better. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank
Hmm.
you. Daniel, if folks want to get in touch with you, how do they go about that?
Pretty easy. The easiest way is just by email, daniel@danielaaron.com. I'm also on a lot of the social platforms. I'm sharing a lot of things there, from YouTube to Facebook to TikTok and Instagram, LinkedIn, as where we are now, right? So any of
Yeah.
those work really well. And it's Daniel Aaron, AA Ron, as the saying goes. Easy to find me.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. It's been a great discussion. Thank you so much.
Well, likewise. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and wonderful to get to connect more.
Awesome. Awesome. And we'll connect more. So, folks, we appreciate you joining us. Whenever you're listening to this, we appreciate it. And we hope you'll come back and join us for more collaboration conversations. Bye bye. We'll see you later.